back to Mind Over Masculinity, the podcast where we dive deep into the heart of what it means to be a man in today's world. Not just by the society's standards, but by our own inner truth. I'm your host Avik, and today we are stepping into a powerful conversation with someone who knows the cost of living behind the armor and also the courage it takes to take it off. Our guest today is, please welcome, Judd Shaw. So, welcome to the show, Judd.
Appreciate being here. Thanks for having me.
Amazing, amazing. So, dear listeners, as you all know, before we start our conversations, I always introduce you with our guest. So, let me introduce you with Judd. So, Judd is an award-winning author, lawyer, CEO, and the father of four. So, after decades of building highly successful companies, he discovered that true fulfillment doesn't come from the titles, the money, or achievements, but it actually comes from something much deeper, which is authentic human connection, which is very true, right? We all love to, like, for me, if I have to say, I really love to connect with people. The networking is the best. So yes, it's very true. Authentic human connection is something which we all love to have. So, through his connection cure framework and his work as the host of the popular Behind the Armor podcast, he helps leaders and men alike discover the bravery it takes to lead with heart, foster genuine relationships, and also create a life that is aligned with their purpose. So his story is rich with the lessons on authenticity, vulnerability, and also the quiet strength of um, showing up as your true self. And trust me, today we will unpack the evolving definition of masculinity and like how disconnection is actually hurting as a man and what it really takes to rewrite that narrative. So, not take much of your time, dear listeners. Let's welcome again to the show. Welcome again, Judd.
Appreciate it.
Amazing. So, Judd, like, you have led companies, raised a family, and also navigated some of the life's most high stake moments. But you have also said that the bravest thing that you have done wasn't in the courtroom or the boardroom, but it was learning to lead with heart. So, uh, if you can share, like, what does the true strength mean to you now? Like, how does that contrast with the definition you grew up believing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, thanks for having me on. I think when we're talking about the subject of masculinity, there's healthy masculinity and toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
And I think that at least here in the United States and what we're seeing globally are that suicide rates have historically been higher for men than women. And the one reason is the stigma against asking for help. And those rates are rising in every age group. Men are accounting for nearly 80% of suicides, but are 50% of the population.
Wow.
The majority of suicide deaths right now, we're seeing are 60.4% are white males. Um, then uh, uh, beyond that are young males. And so young men are reporting the highest suicide rates today in the world. And it's scary. And by way of background, for me, my father was a very successful boxing promoter, and he had the epitome of the alpha male. The watch, the bling, the way he carried himself, spoke to others. And so I grew up thinking that becoming an alpha male was what it meant to be a male.
Yeah.
And a man. And for instance, if I'd fall down and hurt myself, my dad would tell me to get up and stop crying, be a man. Right? We hear this term, be a man.
Yes.
And so what happens is that it sets this standard. And I went on and got my law degree. I got a Rolex watch, I got exotic cars, and all of that was external. And I thought that the more successful I got, um, the more I was told being a provider and being financially successful would make me a man. So I played that game and won it, according to anyone's expectations. Yet ultimately, I felt worse than I ever did before. I was seeking joy, I couldn't find it. I was looking for happiness in all the wrong places. And I worked my butt off for all of this. And I said the world and society had promised that this would buy my happiness.
Yeah.
And if I spent a decade away from my children because I was at the office, because I was grinding it out, and I built a successful law firm, wouldn't that make me more of a man? And I ultimately realized that my net worth was never going to create self worth. And that this chasing of this idea of what it meant to be a man was not only toxic outwardly, externally, but it was
Mm.
also toxic for my own self. And the first thing is masculinity alone is not toxic.
Yeah.
There is healthy version of masculinity, but it's not about being the best or the strongest or the fastest or the one who flaunts money or sleeps with all the women and is praised for all these accomplishments. Like that, most of us who are seeking these things to define us as men are actually deeply insecure. And I think it was best said um, by a man named Lewis Hose, who discussed the idea of masculinity
Mm.
when ultimately um, he said, in looking at how to define masculinity, that the masculine man goes through a journey, a process of self-discovery, and figures out what he needs to acquire the tools, the knowledge, the wisdom, the love, the passion, right? To pursue his destiny. His destiny is his dreams. And those may evolve sort of over time, but in their pursuit, he's not breaking down anyone else or hurting anyone else in doing that. He's not at war with other people, conquering them. He's the one joining forces, searching for the win win. He's the other one who's lifting others up, inspiring others through his own process. He's the hero of his own journey. And in being so, he's looking for every way to have the best relationship possible with his family, his friends, his romantic partner, his colleagues, maybe even his customers. And he's finding the best possible way to show up as the best version of himself. And so I think what's happening is that many men are coming from a wounded place and chasing success, being a provider and being all these things that we've always defined of what being a man is. And so many of us fall short of that. And therefore, sometimes are laid on the garage floor like I was, curled up in a ball, 50-50 on whether I wanted to continue in life.
I mean, that's so powerful. I mean, like I think a lot of men can relate to, what do you say, like chasing the strength as a kind of performance, um,
Yeah.
instead of being presence. Like, and that shift from the external validation to the internal alignment, I mean, um, can feel terrifying. I mean, what do you say, like on this?
So I think what's great to do in perspective of masculinity
Mm.
discussions is talk about sort of just in passing where this sort of came from. If
Yeah,
we if we can recall centuries ago,
yeah,
we're talking about back in knighthood and knights, and when men were running in with their swords and dying on them, and that was the idea of being a man. And we had a sort of a code of conduct for how men could show up back in, for instance, even in medieval times. There was a code of chivalry. A man's sort of uh playbook on how to become a knight. And if you became a knight, you became a man. And so these young squires would admire to do that. And that was because men were the providers. Men were um, providing a home and food and safety, generally speaking, for their feminine partner. And that woman today doesn't need the man to be a provider. Women can, and in large part they are making equal in money to men today. They are able to go out and get jobs. They are able to order their own food on an app or make food. They can go on dating apps. They basically can now provide for themselves, and as they enter and have entered the working world, they are breaking through those glass ceilings. And as they're able to break through the glass ceilings, they're also breaking through what men used to stand for, which were being the primary financial provider for their family. And if women today, beyond now the Industrial Revolution, where men had been providing for their families as the norm, it makes logical sense to understand that men are sort of lost a little bit, particularly younger men, because um, men and women together began to equate money and external power with inherent self worth. And of course, if you had more money or more external power, at some point it made you more valuable. And historically, women had little access to this kind of power. And so they were naturally viewed as less valuable as men. But then this very good thing happened where women came together and they were able to enter political power, social power, educational power, earning power as a matter of principle. And slowly, step by step, over the course of these hundreds of years since these medieval times, they began to get it. And so today, we see that nearly half of women married to men earn as much or more than their husbands. More women than men are now being admitted to college and higher educational institutions. Women in top business positions we're seeing in government institutions, these things are growing every day. And so no one's talking about what's happening to men where there have no place to show their worth or their value. It's always been based on their earnings. And that's how we identified if you're a valuable man. Oh, you made X amount of dollars. And so now we are shifting, and men are in this identity crisis, right? We're not sure of our role anymore. If women can out earn us, if they can provide for themselves, many of us men, I think, can relate or resonate with feeling that way. Like, where is my own self worth? Where is my value to society and to the world? And so I think what happened is that is that shift has turned to how we can provide in terms of of how we show up as a human. And so I think that what we're seeing is more things like emotional intelligence, men who are self-able to be aware of their emotions and regulate their emotions, men who recognize that there's a balance between their work and their life, and work should add to their life. They should find passion and purpose in this. So I think that this whole cultural idea of what being a man looks like is shifting, and that is what is really on us men are becoming this crisis. And I think it's really important for men to understand that this shift means that now tapping into your most genuine self, showing up authentically, showing up as a good human in emotional ways, is now more valuable in the world. So I say, for instance, vulnerability for men is a strength. It's not a weakness. And that's what we used to think about that. If you cry or you're not, or if you're vulnerable, or if you're emotional, you're weak. And I think now we're seeing the opposite.
Very well said. I mean, this is really things that are happening, and also for this, one thing is coming to my mind. I mean, the recent scenarios like we are actually seeing record levels, like you were mentioning also, it is correct. The level of suicide rates and the loneliness, so like we are seeing record levels of loneliness among men. And um, so like you call the connection the cure, but disconnection is almost built in, like how boys are raised. uh, don't cry tough enough, uh, go it alone, so all this kind of things. So from your perspective, uh, what's the biggest barrier like men face in seeking the real connection? Like, is it kind of cultural conditioning, fear of rejection, or maybe something deeper is there? So what is that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first uh, is authenticity. I say for men, authenticity is your superpower. Showing up real and raw. When we're unable to tell people we're hurting or we're struggling, hurt and struggling people
Yeah.
hurt other people because we come from a wounded place.
Yeah.
So I think men need to first be able to say, this is the real me, this is the raw me, that I'm throwing out the categories of what I think stereotypically it takes to look like a man, and I'm going to be that person. I'm not going to hold back on who I really am. I'm going to show up as the coworker, the boss, the partner, the father, the son, the brother, the mentor. How you see me in that version is how you see me across the board. I'm not going to, play into roles and be someone that I'm not. That's the first thing. It's taking us away from our core selves. I also think, I call my podcast Behind the Armor, and the idea behind it is having these real raw conversations with people about the idea of how we can show up in the world to make our biggest impact. And the idea behind the armor plays on that medieval code of chivalry, is what happens when we put that down. And I like to say that bravery starts in the heart. I think that as a man in today's society, there's nothing more brave than being vulnerable and sharing who you are. It means communicating your feelings, your needs, your values, and you're responsible for communicating who you are to others. They're not responsible for figuring out who you are. And so I think authenticity and vulnerability are sort of two sides of the same coin. And I would also uh, say that a big thing for men is expressing emotion in healthy ways. As men, we tend to push down our emotions until they explode. It's okay to feel angry or sad or excited or however we feel, and not to shame ourselves for having these emotions or expressing them in healthy ways. I think we all get dysregulated from time to time, which is not the same thing as feeling emotion. And so learning the signs of your dysregulation and your go-to practices to get you back into a state of emotional regulation. We say men are can be angry, but don't express anger. And men can be hurt or sad or wounded, but don't cry. And so I think we have to shift these things. Oftentimes, I say for men, actually, that tears are a sign of disconnection. And so I think that it's really important that we do that. And finally, call in the cavalry. Speak to other men. Should work with other men. And the best way I always recommend any man who wants to do men's work is go first, is be vulnerable first, is put yourself out there first, is be authentic first. We used to tell men to die on their sword, run into the fire, and don't expect to live. But the truth is, no one gets help if we die. That's sabotage. And so courage means getting through the challenge alive. And when you're bleeding out, don't be alone. Ask for help when you need it, and when it's offered, receive it.
Exactly. Very truly said. Yeah. And I have noticed that even when men know that they need connection, uh, they really struggle to find the safe spaces to drop the mask. And do you think that, uh, like, we as men have to build those spaces ourselves, or like should we be booking outside of the traditional, like, men's circles, quote unquote, for it? Like, what do you say?
So yes, I think that men, at least in my experience, do
Mm,
struggle making relationships
mm,
with other men, but
yeah.
it's critically important that we do that. You
Mm,
know, I think from a young age, many boys are taught messages like "Don't cry, be tough, don't be soft," and of course, men more than women, and data shows this, are have a bigger fear of misinterpretation. You know, being seen as too emotional or needy, or being misunderstood, losing social status among other men for expressing vulnerability. And many male social groups, you know, competition is the norm over jobs, over romantic partners, over physical ability, wealth, status. And these dynamics make it very hard to truly support or be emotionally available, especially if one man's vulnerability might be perceived as another man's advantage, right? It's like competition over connection. That the man may
mm,
see an ability to take advantage. But I
mm,
think here's the hope. When men do find we're able to create spaces that normalize vulnerability, like brotherhood, and have emotional safety. There are men's circles, there are authentic retreats that I've gone on, there are
mm,
open conversations between two guys, and they often discover how deeply they crave and value these bonds. So I think if you're exploring this topic for yourself, you know, I think it's really important that you find these safe spaces that you can be with other men
mm,
and be open, and that's where I think we really go as a sex from survival to thriving.
true. Understood. Exactly. Yeah. And also love to ask about your connection cure framework. Like, you emphasize the vulnerability as a leadership superpower, but like a lot of men worry vulnerability will undermine their authority. So, how do you personally strike that balance between openness and strength when you are leading a team or family?
Yeah, that's a great question. The
Mm-hmm.
connection cure is broken into a four-part framework, and cure stands for CURE. C
Mm-hmm.
for conscious awareness, the idea of, do you understand how you're even showing up or how you're being perceived? Or do you have an awareness? Have you thought about how you're showing up in the world? And is that aligned with how you do want to show up? And if it's not, start looking at those things in how you want to show up and work on them. For instance, really wasn't empathic or had a lot of empathy at one point, but I wanted to be more compassionate. So I started looking into ways to be more empathic or compassionate. And that then aligned with my values. And now I'm showing up in that way. And so the second part is understand, which is really Dr. Gabor Mate famously says it's not about the addiction, it's why the pain. And so understanding this is like understanding the roots of your wounds or where you were hurt or what's preventing you from showing up real, raw, and your authentic version. That
Mm-hmm.
third part of it is the R, the renew. And that means now renewing the connection first with yourself and then with others. Once you're able to really deeply connect with yourself and give yourself those things that you may not have been provided by others, you really sort of step into a power. And last is E for expand. How can you help others and encourage connection with other people now that you found that to be a real leadership and self-led power? And so that's sort of the cure framework. And to answer your question there, inherent in all of that, again, is that vulnerability. And the way I look at it is that other people may still push back. Yeah, you're going to get taken advantage of. Ah, they're going to see you as weak. Ah, you're not going to be really you're not going to be such of a man. You know, these things that we associate vulnerability with. But what happens is in connection is that vulnerability gives permission or others to be vulnerable. And
Mm,
so when I'm speaking with another guy and I start the conversation by saying, "Hey, I just want to tell you that I know you're struggling, and let me tell you about my struggle. And this is where I was, and this is where I was hurt, and this is what happened to me. But I came out of it through doing X, Y, Z." That other guy on that other side of that conversation now is resonating with that energy and
mm,
is able to say, "You know what? Yeah, I'm hurting and struggling too." And
right.
so vulnerability, what happens is even in leadership, you're giving others to say, "Hey, I'm struggling at my work. I can't figure out this problem. Can anyone help me?" So collaboration goes up. It gives other people to say, "Hey, I'm really struggling now.
Yeah.
I'm really, I'm not bringing my full self today. I need some help." Well, now you're driving retention, you're driving collaboration, you're driving innovation, and the other part of that vulnerability is in leadership is you're also driving connection. And so culture goes up when people are like, "Oh, the boss was able to acknowledge this. Well, then I'm certainly able to acknowledge it." And so oftentimes those mistakes that can be really hurtful to a business and that go unreported because people are too afraid to speak about them, they start raising their hand and saying, "Hey, I think I did something wrong," because they're not afraid of the judgment or the reaction that comes from it. So vulnerability breeds, I think, leadership and makes leaders out of all of us. We're in the workplace or my experience working with other men.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely. Totally. And also like if you could rewrite the story of masculinity for the next generation, what would it sound like?
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I
Yeah.
think what it would look like is what would today's modern knight's code of chivalry look like? If
Mhm.
we took that from hundreds and hundreds from the medieval times and tried to apply it today, what would that look like?
Right.
And I think that um, when we're talking about guidelines for how to be strong, right? Men admire to be strong and honorable and courageous. Today, we don't carry swords and wear armor anymore, but we still want to be these things. And speaking to particularly young men or boys, I
Yeah.
think what the code that makes us stronger together is authenticity, is vulnerability,
Mhm.
is prioritizing genuine connection. Get off the dating apps, get off your screens. They only make you feel more alone, and intentionally reach out and make meaningful human connections. Like have a guy friend that you can hang out with once a week and just sort of like share what's going on in your life. I'd
Right.
say master those healthy social skills. So learn to interact positively, uh, and those things help you feel seen and heard and valued and cared for.
Right.
Again, expressing those emotions in healthy ways, right? Learning how to have emotional intelligence,
Right.
healthy self awareness, healthy self regulation. I'd also tell men to fight to resolve, not to win. And that means interacting positively with other men doesn't mean avoiding conflict. It means working together to resolve issues, not proving you're right, fighting fair, not personal attacks. Men should lift each other up. We shouldn't tear each other down. We're on the same team and we're stronger together. And
Right.
then I think the last one is creating that ripple effect. Emotional contagion is a scientific fact. So when you show up authentically and vulnerably with someone else, you're allowing them to do the same. You're inviting that, you're giving permission for that. And then they can show up that way with you, with a friend, with a partner, with a child, maybe even for the first time. And so these ripple effects can positively impact individuals, relationships, families, workplaces, communities. I mean, to your point, even generations.
True. Exactly. And wow. And also, like, for the men who are listening right now, or maybe they'll be listening later, who feel stuck in the old narratives. So, where should he begin? What do you say?
I would say start to tap into, for instance, the connection cure, my framework.
Mm,
Start to tap into yourself, find your core values, start exploring what you believe
yeah.
makes you a man if you can remove all the society stereotypes.
Mm,
What are those things that make you feel first like a human? That you're just showing up to the world real and raw and looking to make a positive impact. And then how does that tap into your self worth if you would remove money and success and being a provider and those type of things? What do you believe makes you valuable to the world? And start to tap into that connection first with yourself and then put it out there in the world. Oftentimes what we're doing is we're going off some other metric or some other standard to determine whether we ourselves are being a good man or big good human, but define those for yourself, because what's authentic to you, what you care about, is not necessarily what someone else may care about. And so removing those masks means removing all of those things that we've been told, whether it's from our kid, whether from our childhood as parents or our teachers or our mentors or our first bosses, and remove those things and start to explore what we believe makes us a good human and thus a good man, and then start to go from there.
that's amazing. Lovely. And wow. So, Judd, thank you so much for showing us that bravery does not allow, I mean, always the roar, but it offers whispers also. So, sometimes
Yeah.
small joys.
Bra-
Yeah,
Bravery starts in the heart.
exactly. Exactly. And sometimes, like, small choices also, like saying truth and picking up the phone, taking off the armor. I mean, yeah, definitely. So, for everyone who's listening, if today's conversation resonated, take one courageous step this week, because reach out to someone you trust and share something real. Or maybe just sit with yourself and ask, like, where am I hiding? It's very important. Uh, you give some time to yourself. And also, please go connect with Judd, follow his work, check out Behind the Armor podcast, and keep an eye out for his upcoming book, like How to Live Authentically and The Surprising Cure for Loneliness and Disconnection. Because the world doesn't need more perfect men, it actually needs more present men like us. So, uh, so Jay, if someone wants to connect with you, what would be the best medium?
I'd suggest you can go to social media or Instagram at Judd Shaw Official, JuddShaw Official, at Judd Shaw Official. I'm always posting stuff there about our subjects and topics that we've discussed here, and connection. And DM me, reach out. I'd love to hear from you and your thoughts on this. I think it's an important subject, and we have to turn these stats around for our young men who are actually dying as a result of the loneliness and disconnection to themselves and to the world. So reach out to me there. Go to my website at juddshaw.com, and that'll take you to all the different things in my verse.
Exactly. Lovely. So, dear listeners, I'll put all the links in the show notes for your easy reference. And with this hope, thank you so much for tuning into Mind Over Masculinity. And until next time, I'm Avik reminding you, your heart is your greatest strength. So, please use it. So, thank you so much.